This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I thank you for tuning into our podcast. And of course, we come to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters located in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me on the podcast is my daring duo, the weather wizard himself, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike. Now,
Go ahead.
all right, Mike, go ahead. Introduce yourself again.
You just gave me a great introduction, I suppose.
I used to do that, and then you got mad at me. You said I did it too much.
I don't know if daring duo is the right thing. It should be more dynamic duo.
Dynamic duo. Yeah, I
is
like
what
that better.
Yeah, sure.
You changed it on the rundown, not me.
I did not touch that portion.
Oh, well, then Mike, it must have been Mike Priante, our producer. I'll have to blame him. I did look it over, of course. I just figured I'd just go with it.
Well, anyway, Brad, great to be here as always. And I was just thinking the other day that, man, I was thinking of this crazy blizzard that they had out in the Midwest back in 2011. It was the Groundhog Day blizzard, they dubbed it. And I don't know why I was thinking about that. Maybe because, we wanted to talk about the Midwest weather a little bit more on the podcast.
2011. I mean, I wasn't at WeatherWorks yet. You were already there, and I was actually in South Carolina then. And you know what? And I did the weather on TV down there. I do remember though, we did a story actually on that, and I didn't do it. It was like one of our top stories, I think, as we started the day. And it was a blizzard in the Midwest. Chicago got buried.
It was just a crazy storm. Now, at this time, I was doing more forecast out in the Midwest, actually. I mean, typically I'm forecasting in New England, but at that time, I was out in the Midwest. I was also doing certified snowfall tolls for us out in in Illinois. And man, this storm had all the earmarkings that you would see on an East Coast nor'easter, where you had heavy snow, thunder snow in Chicago.
Oh, that was that's right. That was the Jim Cantori
Right.
original, right?
I don't know if it was the original. I doubt
Okay.
that. However, I know he did his typical freak out thing
Right.
when
He
there was
live
thunder
and
snow.
yeah, the
He
thunder
was
came
live
out.
in downtown Chicago, and the thunder snow happened several times, I believe. But man, this storm, 21 inches fell in the city of Chicago. And if you know anything about Chicago, I mean, they get snow and they do get a lot of instances of snow, but getting that caliber of snowstorm,
It's tough to have that perfect setup.
right, it doesn't happen that often. I mean, on the eastern seaboard, we get that happening more often. But here, man, they really cashed in. They were right in that sweet spot of the storm. They had gusts over 60 miles an hour, 10-foot drifts. Lakeshore Drive was closed in Chicago with cars just stranded.
Yeah, that was the one when cars got stranded, right? Right there on the lakefront, and
Yeah, and the funniest thing about it, well, not funny, but the craziest thing is that this low wasn't even all that strong. It was 996 millibars. So
yeah, that's like an average storm here on the.
but what really set it off is that the high pressure to the northwest of it was 1052 millibars, and that is extremely high. So we're not talking about a storm that had really low pressures, but man, the pressure gradient between the high and the low was just so great, creating those winds. I gotta say, it's one of the most memorable storms that I've witnessed here at WeatherWorks, honestly. I mean, yeah, there's big ones on the list like Sandy and all that, but this is definitely ranking up there.
Yeah, like you said, the that wind, I'm sure, coming off of
Yeah.
Lake Michigan had to be just ridiculous. A 1052 high. I mean, that pressure gradient, like you said, that northeast wind had to just be screaming. I mean, and that I'm sure added to the moisture content of the storm itself.
Yeah, I think there was some lake enhancement happening there off of Lake Michigan also. But to that topic, Brad, why don't we get on to why we're talking about the Midwest here so much?
Yeah, I mean, you moved on. You're forecasting now in New England, and I'm mostly Hudson Valley, Western Connecticut, Long Island. So of course, we can talk about it as much as we want, but we thought we'd bring in our Midwest forecaster, really our guru here at WeatherWorks, meteorologist Chris Castellano. And he knows all the ins and outs of the microclimates of the Midwest, and we thought it'd be great to get his perspective on not only, of course, that storm, but Midwest weather and how it can have different challenges really to forecast, not only in the winter but also in the summer. Big differences between the Northeast and Midwest. So we'll have Chris on, but before we get to that, we'll take a short break here in the Weather Lounge, and we'll be right back. So don't go away.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Prianti from the Weather Lounge here, and let me tell you, dehydration is no joke. I went through it myself once, and it's not fun. You get headaches, muscle spasms, cramps, the whole 9 yards. But proper functional hydration is essential for just about everyone. Sometimes, though, water may not be enough, and that's where Liquid IV comes in. They're the #1 powdered hydration brand in America, and their hydration multiplier is something you're most likely missing in your daily routine. You don't even have to be a sports professional to enjoy it either. With just one stick, you can hydrate twice as fast than using water alone. It has 3 times the amount of electrolytes than leading sports drinks, it's made from non-GMO ingredients, and it's chock full of essential vitamins. I personally enjoy the passion fruit flavor, but there are other great refreshing flavors you can choose from as well. So whether you're out landscaping, plowing a parking lot in a snowstorm, heading out for that afternoon jog, or even just feeling run down, Liquid IV is your go-to source for all hydration and wellness. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code WeatherLounge, capital W, capital L, at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code WeatherLounge at liquidiv.com.
And welcome back to the Weather Lounge, everyone. I'm one of your co-hosts, meteorologist Brad Miller. Of course, Mike Mahalik across the desk from me here. And I would like to introduce to you right now meteorologist Chris Castellano. He, again, is our Midwest forecaster, one of our Midwest forecasters here at WeatherWorks. And also his voice may sound familiar as he does the introduction to our podcast here in the Weather Lounge. And Chris, thanks again for joining us here on the podcast.
Yep, absolutely. Glad to join you guys. It's gonna be some fun.
Yeah, I mean, and Chris, just a little background. In fact, you and I trained together at WeatherWorks. I remember when we were hired, and we went through our training around the same time. And I remember you used to always come in with your Mets jacket. You were a huge Mets fan. I'm a huge Yankees fan. I just remember always chit chatting with you about that. And also, you're a Rangers fan, which is nice. New York Rangers, of course. We're both Rangers fans.
Yep, 100%. Bleed blue and orange, bleed blue and red with the
Yeah,
Rangers. So we always commiserate, at least with the Rangers. So.
yeah, it was always nice that we, come in and talk to Chris about, the baseball and the hockey. But
Excuse me while I'm getting sick over here, guys.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
As a Philly fan, I have to disagree with all this
Hey, you guys won a Super Bowl
Yankee Met.
recently in a World Series back in 2008. So,
Yeah, I guess, but it's okay. But
but more importantly, we have Chris on the podcast today because he again is our one of our.
well, we're not going to talk about sports this
Yeah, we
podcast.
can do that.
Well, fun fact about that is I was living in Philly at the time when they won the World Series. So,
Ah,
Oh,
which was not fun for me. So that's another story.
well, the Yankees turned out on being the
oh
next year,
man,
though, so.
you must have went down to the parade downtown and everything, didn't you?
Now I heard all the pots and pans after when they won. Yep.
Yeah. All
That's right.
right.
Yankees took care of business the next year in 2009.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so Chris, again, let's open things up here a little bit about what are some of the biggest Midwest forecasting differences, basically from the Northeast or really any other region across the country.
I really do think they come with all sort of like the same challenges, just about with anyone else. I mean, you gotta predict what the snow's gonna do to pavement and everything like that. It's never easy. And snow being probably one of the most important aspects of winter forecasting, especially from what our clients do care about. But the one thing I would say it's it it snows a lot, quite often. I know we've been, a little quiet here, but so is most of the country lately. But for the most part, they don't get a lot of, Groundhog Day blizzards. Like like the one Mike is talking about.
Yeah, well, like Mike said in the first part of the podcast, it snows a lot in Chicago frequently, but it's rare to get that one big dump of snow. But it does happen from time to time.
Exactly. I mean, it can be it just is very busy. Because we get a lot of events out here. There's a lot of things, and we'll probably talk about that, I guess, a little bit on be a topic of conversation later. But they get a lot of different ways in which they can snow. And they can snow almost sometimes with very little reason. So, it's just a very busy area. A lot of them do snow. They have many different ways in which they can snow. It can be very, very cold. So all that definitely adds to some of the challenges that we deal with out here. Whereas we get our one storm every once in a while out here in the east, but it's a high impact storm. We get a lot of events out in the Midwest.
Yeah, and Chris, when you say Midwest, what are we talking about so our listeners know kind of a general region? I think most do know, but maybe just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so anywhere from the Ohio Valley, Ohio through Indiana and Illinois, and even up into like Wisconsin, I would call that generally the Midwest. For our purposes, it really is from Illinois to like Western Pennsylvania, kind of, and how we kind of handle it. But in terms of like the actual Midwest, I would kind of just call it the Ohio Valley out to Illinois and Wisconsin.
I think there's a little bit of a misnomer here because we talk about the Northeast weather a lot, and there's different elevation changes, there's valleys, there's cold air damming situations, things like that. There's the ocean right nearby, but I feel like sometimes you get this impression that, well, it's the Midwest, it's all sort of flat out there, it can't be that hard, right, to forecast. But in reality, I'm sure there are tons of challenges out there, and I've had some experience out there, and it's not always a cookie cutter, straightforward type thing. Uh, I
Absolutely
mean,
not.
man, I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit more and just, maybe about some of the situations that you encounter.
You got a lot of different, topographical, that's the word, challenges here when you talk about the Midwest. One of the biggest things being the lakes, and number one, Chicago. I know that's already being the main topic of conversation already, but not to give it too much love, but yeah, the lake is a huge challenge when it comes to forecasting snow in the Midwest. Um, if we want to just talk in terms of snow, it can deal. We can deal with a lot of problems with the temperature out there. If the lakes are too warm, there's a lot of lake influence. But at the same time, we have to juggle sort of lake influence with the temperatures and impacting how warm the pavements stay. Whereas inland spots are a little colder, versus also lake enhancement. And there's a lot of times where sometimes we do like look at a lot of the guidance that likes to bring up these bands of snow that get enhanced by the lake and the flow off the lake. But a lot of times that doesn't really materialize. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So there's a lot of that goes on, and then not only to mention that, I mean, probably one of the worst places to try to forecast in Chicago is the downtown metro, because not only are you dealing with the lake once you get to that point, but you're also dealing with obviously population,
Populated
and a
urban
lot
heat
of
island, all that
yep.
good stuff.
100%. I was going to bring up this storm, but this is the number one example. So my first week here with WeatherWorks. This was back in 2015 when I first joined. Brad and I were talking about that. The very first storm I got introduced to. It was my first week here. Um, doing winter forecasts in the morning, and it was it was the 2015 storm, I believe. Looking at it from November 20th to the 21st, it smacked Chicago with anywhere from 2 to 20 inches of snow.
Oh my
The met
gosh.
the downtown metro had 2 inches of snow and didn't stick to pavement. Whereas, just a couple of counties over in McHenry got 15 to 20. Um, so
I don't know if I remember that storm, but how are you supposed to? I mean, that's hard to forecast.
well, not only did I have to forecast it, I also had to do the certified snowfall total
Ay,
for
ay,
it.
ay.
So,
Oh,
Yeah.
so that was my intro to the Midwest, and we have been together ever since. So.
well, it decided to welcome you with open arms, I suppose, with a incredibly challenging storm that you don't normally see out in the Midwest. Those type of gradients.
You think that last 2 to 4 inch forecast was tough, Chris? Here, hold my beer, Midwest.
Yeah, yeah.
Watch
Well,
this storm.
it set me up, and I really do in a way. It's sort of good to get your feet to the fire, right? When you're first coming out, on and
Maybe not like that though. You
yeah.
got dipped in down to your waist.
But it did. In some ways, it kind of toughens you a little bit. You're like, oh well, how much worse could this get? And then we had another 5 storms after that, 2 weeks. Because I do remember that being a particularly busy period, those first couple of weeks. So, but I kind of learned almost quickly, just how frequently they snow out here. And that's one of the biggest things. As far as anywhere else, and I know I want to give some other places some love. Um, Really, the thing I would say is probably the most challenging for, if you're going to be talking about elevations, it's really the valleys. It's the Ohio Valley. When you talk about like Ohio, because there is actually some sneaky elevation out there. So there are some topographical challenges in those spots, and then of course, places like Cincinnati and in Indianapolis, you have your metropolitan concerns. So, it is a little bit of a challenge. The good news is we don't have to deal with effects from the mountains or anything like that. Um, it is sort of straightforward when you have a nice big synoptic system. You just have to deal with sort of the normal stuff, as opposed to
There's
worrying
no
about.
real cold air damming per se in the Midwest, though, is there? I mean, not like there is in the Northeast. I mean, I guess you get boundaries that set up, but nothing like what we deal with here.
I think they get like a weakened version of it sometimes in Indy and parts of Ohio. Could actually lead to some mixing and some ice. So they have like their own little version of it, but it's not nearly to the prevalence of what places out here in the Northeast can get.
Let's talk about Midwesting, Chris. It's a popular term that we use
My
here at
favorite.
WeatherWorks.
Yeah.
What is Midwesting?
So, there, not a lot of people are going to know what this is. As
Right,
a
I
matter of fact, I don't
understand.
think anybody does.
Yeah, no, this is more coined, coined by our forecasters here. And I think it might have been coined by Chris,
Yeah, it might have
to
been.
be
I
honest with
think it
you.
was I think I might have, or between myself and one of our former colleagues that used to cover the zone
We
with
may have
me.
to call Webster's Dictionary and see if we
Yeah.
can add it to the next year.
Please, hey, look, we can make it a thing. Why not? But yeah, so yeah, I think we coined it a number of years ago because there were so many times, and this is part of the challenge too. And this is what I was talking about before in terms of like it never stopped snowing in Chicago, and in the Midwest. And there were times where it just seemed to randomly snow for no reason. And we would predict, oh, the snow will stop at sunset, and it would keep going and going, and there would be these flakes and flurries that would actually
We met
continue into
sunset
the overnight.
tomorrow, not today.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you the truth. I have come in on some mornings, and I would see it snow showering. Like, you know, why is it snow showering right now? It's 4 a.m. This stuff was supposed to be out of here last night. Why is it still snowing? And it would actually be, and it would be so cold that it would just be flakes, and it would be enough to be impactful. Um, and we were just like, all right, what in the world is causing all this? Why does this continue to keep happening? Um, and so what it was we just looked at a few different types of things, and one of the biggest drivers is simply cold air. Is it cold? If it's cold, then if I don't know if I want to get too technical about the snow growth zone, but that would in that area where it's normally cold enough to create flakes, you know, way up into the atmosphere, it would happen right at the
I
surface.
was going to say the snow growth zone would be very, very low to the ground.
Exactly. So that, when you're creating these flakes, instead of creating them at 800 millibars, 700 millibars, 600 millibars, you're creating them, you know, at the height of what was the Sears Tower. You're talking about very, very low, areas in which the snow can
Usually
grow.
can't be seen on radar.
Exactly.
Um,
Most models don't even pick it up. You almost this is purely meteorology. This is purely not looking at a model. This is looking at the setup and how it looks, and just figuring out, hey, you know what? There's a little bit of moisture. There's a 500 millibar trough. There's cold air. Um, you know, all these things, and even a little bit of instability at the ground level, create almost like these convective snow showers, like almost like thunder showers during the day or at any time, really. Um, and that's what we started to notice. And when we picked up on that, we figured out, hey, this is why this snow continues to happen. And it's not. It doesn't sound like the most impactful thing. We're only talking about coatings of snow, but it can be a problem.
sure, a
There's times
coating of
where it's
snow
not
at
a problem.
15 degrees is a problem.
Exactly. It could be happening like this, and it's not a problem. It's just flurries. It doesn't matter. And then there's times where it's actually cold enough for it to actually be a problem. And there have been times where I've actually had to justify why I put snow in the forecast because nobody else would do it. And we get a call from a client, one of our biggest clients that we have out in Indianapolis. He would call us and be like, hey, listen, I don't know, nobody else is saying that this snow is happening. You guys are saying it. Why is that? And I would explain it. And then sure enough, it happened. Because we just know that this setup is always a thing out here. So, as little as it sounds, and a coating of snow doesn't sound like much, it's a problem for some of our clients because they got to worry about that. If it sticks to pavement, it's a liability.
And that's good that again, you've been out there for a long time and you recognize these things, and that's what it takes, and that's what makes us so much better, I think, than others, when we recognize a certain setup because you've been doing this for so long in that area. Same thing with Mike in New England. I know that there's going to be ocean effect snow because this is the typical setup for it. And it's the recognition, I think, of being in that zone or that area for so long.
Yep, 100%, and we've seen it to the point where we've, I can remember it well in Indianapolis a few years ago. Forecasting for them, it was a Midwestern setup. It was regular snow showers and flurries. All right, we're not worried about it. But then during the day, all of a sudden, in one area in Indianapolis, they started to snow, and we're getting a squall in this one little area, and that was industrial snow. There was a factory that was creating snow. We had to contact our clients because it was covering pavement. So it's the type of thing that can happen out there, and it happens a lot more.
And wasn't there an instance, even I remember this a couple of years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there an instance somewhere near the runway of Midway, or the back, like from the hot air coming out of the planes?
Correct. Yep. And it's happened, and they'll get these funky shaped returns on radar, and you're like, it's just kind of like radar noise, not a big deal, right? Turns out, and it was actually snowing really hard for like 2 minutes.
Because it was so cold, but the heat from the planes and the exhaust, I guess, was causing enough. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep. And I think it's just there's little issue from any kind of you know topographical effects or anything like that. There's very little issue from anything, and then you have the access to the cold air. If it's at the it doesn't. It's not often that it gets that cold, that get that kind of shallow cold out here. You get it frequently in places like Chicago and even Indy and Ohio. where it just kind of sits there. It's more landlocked. It's in a better spot. So if it's really, really cold and you got a little bit of moisture added to that, any moisture source, and it doesn't even have to be from the atmosphere. It could just be, a little bit of, atmospheric moisture, and then, you know, a factory or a ski
Steam
resort
from a power plant.
steam for a power plant. I mean,
We've seen that. We've actually seen that in the Northeast a few times too. But
Absolutely. There was a case, I think, where out near State College, I remember there was a factory or something.
don't bring it up.
And well, in reality, it was from a sanitation plant. So, I'm pretty sure the snow was not discolored,
No,
but
I know.
yeah, don't eat that snow.
our producer is Mike Priante is messaging poop snow.
Well, but hey, Mike, didn't we do a
On the-
video a number of years ago? We did a video about don't eat the snow.
that's
The
that's
dirty snow.
true.
We shouldn't eat it anyway.
Um,
Yeah, it's very
yeah,
dirty.
I mean snow, even though it looks white and clean and pure, when you actually get, you know, uh, go get a cup full of that and melt it down in your microwave one time, and you'll see that there is way more particulates in there than you
A
would
lot
like.
of
So
floaters you don't want to be involved with.
so when your kids are out there eating snow or something like that, I mean, I've done it. Obviously, I'm sure
Yeah.
everybody has really, eaten snow before.
Probably have accidentally done it during a snowball fight.
Right, exactly. But in reality, when you melt that down, you look at it and go, oh, it's a little dirty.
Maybe that's why Lucy didn't like December snow. Because remember in the Peanuts when she said,
That's true.
I don't like December. I usually wait till January, February.
Yeah, yeah, they're not ripe until February, right? Um, but
The dendrites aren't ripe till January.
yeah, exactly.
Right
Um,
for the picking.
Yeah, but yeah, man, Midwesting is one of those crazy things that certainly happens a lot out there.
Well, Chris, if we can get it into the Webster's dictionary, then you can use it in your
Yeah,
discussion one day. Like a good dose of Midwesting is on the way.
yeah,
If you don't know what that is, go look it up in the dictionary.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we can at least get it on the Urban Dictionary or something like
Yeah,
that.
no, there could be other one. No,
Um, but uh, but Chris, I mean, you mentioned it before. The lakes are certainly an influence when it comes to the Midwest, and sometimes it's very subtle things. Um, that can get that lake effect snow in. I remember forecasting in the Midwest and in the Chicago area in particular, and you might have a north wind, which is bringing a band into like Gary, Indiana, or something like that. But you get an ever so slight shift out of the northeast or something like that, and it doesn't even have to be at the surface. It might be aloft a little bit, and all of a sudden that band starts creeping in toward, towards the lake shore, and good, and can be substantial at times. I'm sure you've forecasted some of these events.
Yes, a number of them, and sometimes I'll be, and I'm gonna just be honest. This is honesty and truth hour. I am 50-50 on trying to get those, and I don't think there's anybody else is much better.
No, Chris, come on now. You are definitely better than 50%.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I got some stats right here that says Chris
Oh, thank
is
you.
85%
nice.
on
Wow.
lakeshore lake enhancement in Chicago. So there you have it, right here for my official stats right here.
Oh, that sounds great. Before I actually answer your question, I wanted to find. I've been looking for this while you were hearing your question.
My stats?
No. I wanted to find our I wanted to find our definition of what we call Midwesting. And
Mm.
it's fantastic. The act of seemingly random but isn't actually random flurries and snow showers lingering into eternity.
Yeah, go. I like
I
that.
like it. It's perfect.
Yep. I had to find that quote. Because I was looking for a good way to just throw it into one little sentence. And a colleague of ours made that quote. One of them did, and I was just like, they passed it along to me, and I like, Chris, what do you think of this? And like, I'm like, that's perfect. That is exactly how I describe it. Because I'm not exactly a wordsmith, so that quote was just absolutely perfect. Uh, but
I
um,
love it. I love it.
but yeah, to answer what you were talking about, Mike, with lake effect. So yeah, it is not the easiest thing in Chicago, and I think just the biggest challenge with it. Whereas, like in Buffalo and in places, in Lake Erie and stuff like that, not to say it's easy to forecast lake effect out there, but that wind direction when it's more constant out of the west, and you have that fetch over this large, fetch over a large lake, it becomes to me a more, a little bit easier to try to peg or at least know it's going to happen. Um, it's not often that you get these nice, northeast flows that get snow showers off, and it's that constant off the lakeshore and onto, on into Chicago that often. It has to be a real exceptional setup in order for it to happen, and I think that's one thing that models like to really, really pick out a lot. And then a lot of times it doesn't happen. I would say, like, when a model has it, there's usually like a 50% chance it actually happens, and maybe 30% chance it's usually impactful.
You know what, Chris? I can kind of back that up with the same thing in the New England area because there's some high resolution, yeah, ocean effect problems. And there's high resolution models that are very insistent on bringing moisture into southern New England a lot. And there's many times where I'm seeing this on those high resolution models. Not to name any names, 3 kilometer
He
NAM.
named names.
I did. But yeah, I mean, there's many times where I'm seeing that flow come on shore, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's really look at this. What's the triggers? What's helping it? Is there anything enhancing it? Is this a real thing or not? And Chris, it's hard to decipher, and a lot of times it just is some extra moisture and maybe some clouds, and not really snow. But I can feel your pain. Uh, yeah. What's the quote from Field of Dreams? Ease his pain or something like that. That's what I need. I need the voice to help me out a little bit.
For anybody of any of our local sports fans know, "Oh, the pain, bro."
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, no, it's not the easiest thing to get, and I talked before about lake enhancement, which is another thing. Again, it's just these little localized bands. You get a westerly flow or northwest flow from a storm that's coming in, moisture, everything kind of converges. Get a lot of convergence along the lake.
Again, I feel you, man.
Yeah, and it's another another overdone thing from guidance. And there's very special times in which that does happen, and there's times where it just doesn't. It's like you sort of have to not fall for it in a way, too often. Know the times, know when it's a special case. Like, okay, really think that this lake enhancement is a real thing this time. This lake effect is a real thing this time. And I think another way where they can get the lake effect to actually truly happen is that do have some convergence. I mean, I think whereas if you got like this nice west wind that's just going right off and into Buffalo, you're gonna just get this constant this constant band of snow that just sits there all the entire time. Whereas Chicago, sometimes I think we rely a little bit more on this little northwest wind and land flow that comes into the lake and creates these little small scale bands and lets them sit there and sustain for a little bit. If you find something like that, then that's a real good indication that that lake effect is probably a little bit more likely than it normally is.
And I guess if you get that right trajectory of wind, would it be, I guess, a north.
Yeah, it's more like a northeast to northwest.
Yeah, you get that long band going.
You do need that fetch, that very long northeast fetch, about 850 millibars. You need that in northeast fetch, probably more northeast. And if you have like a little bit of a wind off of the land, it kind of just helps keep these bands sustained.
Right.
And in
So you got a lot of convergence at the surface, is what you're saying.
exactly a lot of convergence.
And for our listeners out there, you have convergence at the surface. That means, well, the air can't go down, right? So it's got to go up if you have winds converging. So that gives you that little extra lift to sustain the band.
Correct. And it almost kind of stabilizes it too, where it doesn't let it go anywhere. So
Hmm.
it almost kind of lets it sit in one place. And
Yeah, I can remember seeing a few instances on radar where you can see the band like the entire length of Lake Michigan, like going all the way up into like Wisconsin and
that's the other thing too. You need not only do you need the long fetch, you need a sustained fetch to really let it kind of sit and stew for a while. If it's just kind of fleeting, it'll last a few hours. Models will always pick up and say, "Hey, there's going to be this band of snow," but it winds up actually not being as much because maybe it was just for a few hours. And oftentimes I don't think the models are necessarily wrong in showing snow, and it winds up happening that these little clusters and bands will form. Oftentimes, just doesn't get it right as far as to how far inland they get, and how widespread they.
Right. And that's always something, even though I haven't been out there forecasting as long as you, Chris, it's always something I like to look at. If I was going to forecast a lake effect event in the Chicago area, I'd be looking for that long fetch from north to south across Lake Michigan. And then I started looking for, okay, do these winds start turning out of the north northeast at any point during this forecast period? And that's when I knew that lake band could start drifting towards the shoreline and give a problem. Those are the situations that I like to see, over, maybe a consistent northeast wind, but it's also hard to get a very cold, consistent northeast wind bringing lake bands in.
And it's the same problem we talked about before too, right? You need that shallow, cold air. Not only, while it does happen in the Midwest a lot, usually you get that shallow, cold air on a northwest flow. So if right, if it's northwest flow, it's not gonna, your all your bands of snow that are gonna eventually form off the lake over very cold air. It's going to wind up going into Michigan. Whereas it's very rare, or it's a little bit more rare anyway, for you to get that very sustained north northeast wind with very cold air in place.
And in those very rare times, they even get that little lake effect vortex that develops that will come down Lake Michigan. It looks like a mini tropical cyclone or
yeah.
something like
I'm forgetting to mention that. Yes, 100%. That happens a lot actually. I'd say it's probably one of the biggest things I usually see. It looks cool, for sure, but it definitely it's more of those one of those things, and again, that you probably see more impact like Gary, Indiana, because they wind up just kind of swirling about and
A
going
Christmas
down.
story.
Yeah, there you go.
But the thing is, Chris, they look cool and they look like, oh my gosh, you're going to be destroyed by this swirling mass of lake effect, right? But in reality, maybe not that impactful compared to just a solid band.
No, yeah, exactly. So it'll just squall. It'll squall. You won't be able to see the hand in front of your face for a few minutes, but then you'll be fine
Sure.
after that.
Yeah, there you go. So, but if you ever get a chance to pick one of those out, we'll have to share some on our social media if we see any through the winter here. But those are one of the coolest little things. Just looks like a mini hurricane almost, but nowhere near as impactful. Um,
Snow
yeah.
NATO.
So, um, but Chris, we talked a lot about lake effect. We talked about Midwesting. Is there another phenomena that you'd like to talk about in the Midwest that is tricky?
Um, One of the things that I think is probably toughest to deal with, and really try to pick out sometimes. I think, i- and this impacts mostly Indiana and Ohio, are coastal low transfers. So all the things that happen out here, where we get our very big blockbusters, snowstorms out here, or nice, snowmaking coastals. Um, Out there, when that happens, it actually could be a struggle for them to snow, because in all reality, a big coastal storm originates from some type of clipper, right? So you have that big cold storm that, or a nice little quick moving cold storm coming out of the northwest. And it looks like it's going to snow really, really well for, like, for Indiana. And then it just kind of hits a wall because it's transferring all of its energy to another low that's going to be eventually our big blockbuster. And we like to call Indiana, Indianapolis sometimes, in Ohio, the snow hole.
Lovingly, right?
Yeah,
Lovingly.
exactly. In that regard, because they do sometimes get shadowed by that, and it's another thing where, models will tend to underdo how quickly that transfer happens. Of course, the stronger our storm eventually winds up being out here. Or I say our, out here in the east. When it winds up being stronger there, it's all the more reason why something like that would happen out in the Ohio Valley, and they can wind up getting sort of, on the low end of things, as it were. Another thing is to,
And before you go ahead there, Chris, I just wanted to clarify the snow hole thing. Listen, we call Hackettstown, New Jersey, our headquarters, the snow
uh,
hole of New
I
Jersey.
didn't mean to offend anybody by, like, we have the
Yeah,
crown.
I know, but I just wanted to clarify that because it just seems that when we're getting big nor'easters and stuff like that, that heavy band will be to the west, to the east, just to the north in Sussex County, New Jersey.
Jump over us.
Monmouth County seems to be a hot spot all the
Yeah.
time in New Jersey, for coastal storms. And yeah, it just seems like in Hackettstown, we're on the good old fringe of stuff, 9 times out of 10, and just not getting the heaviest snow bands. So it's okay. Those in India and Ohio, we understand. Um, you're not the only place that has a problem snowing sometimes.
Yeah, and they do. And the one thing I was just about to mention was, so they don't have, what we have out here is we have the extra, like, they all have, like, the moisture source from the Gulf and everything like that. They do, we do,
Hmm.
but we also have the added benefit of Atlantic moisture, when it comes to these big storms. Well, it's not something that Indiana, really has. They also don't have the benefit of time, when these storms develop. If they're not, a lot of times these storms are developing out of, Texarkana and places like that, and by the time the storm becomes really mature, as it works through the Ohio Valley, it's not really, fully formed, or, in its best shape. So a lot of times, if we're actually trying to forecast, like, oh, this thing looks like it's going to produce, over a foot of snow, I could tell you from experience, at least for places like Indiana and Ohio, I don't think I've actually had many times where I've put into a forecast a 10 plus inch event. And a lot of times, whenever it happens, I have to take a step back.
Yeah, you got to think about it a little bit longer, huh?
Exactly. So they lack that additional little bit of moisture. I think that, I don't think in terms of cold or climatologically speaking, they're just any different in that way. Cold air, all things being equal, I think they would have just as well of a shot. But I think they just lack that little bit of extra cold air. And so, like, if you are forecasting something that's really large, you might have to just take that really little bit of step back and be like, "Oh, I don't know." Sometimes.
Well, yeah, it's just unfortunately, for the snow lovers out there, it's the storm tracks just have a hard time lining up for those just right. I mean, if you have a big inland runner, usually it's something that's going to be, coming out of Arkansas and then going directly over Indiana or something like that, and then you're going to have a snow to a sleet to rain situation, where you're getting that warm air coming in from the south, and all the people out to the west of there towards Illinois, they're doing okay because they're getting a big band of snow. Um, and then, like Chris said, you miss on the Clippers sometimes because they're transitioning, and then the East Coast gets hammered by a good snow. So it's hard to get that track, and it probably has something to do with the Appalachians, I would say, that you would almost need for a big storm in Indiana and Ohio. You would almost need a low to track right up the spine of the Appalachians, and that typically just doesn't occur. The low is either to the west or to the east of them. It never really.
The only problem is when that happens is the Northeast and the New England and Mid Atlantic all suffer with rain because that's rarely going to be a
Well,
good track
we're
for
not worried about them today, Brad.
Yeah, we're not concerned about that. This is
Sounds good.
specifically Midwest
Yeah.
forecast. Even though we were slipping in some New England references and New Jersey references.
Hey, look, I am not a Midwest resident, so we'll just put that put that out there. Obviously a Northeast resident, but more of my experience with more of my expertise as it were, as with experience in terms of this region and how it goes. But yeah, it is tough for them to, it is tough for them to get a lot of big events, like like how we do. I think we're a lot of all or nothing sometimes. Um, where Midwest can do quite a lot and it snow a lot, but they don't get quite these huge blizzards all the time, or there at least there's a cap in how much they can get out of them. For various number of reasons, and I think probably one of them being just that lack of that extra little moisture source. Um,
On the flip side of that, if we're talking about summer, you're probably going to see a lot more severe weather than we typically get on the East Coast. So, yeah, no,
yeah,
am I wrong?
yeah, no, you're right. Personally myself, I mean, honestly, I feel like I've been in sort of a down period the last few years.
Okay, you can just tell me I'm entirely wrong. I was
You are
making an
so wrong. You are so wrong, Mike.
You're the expert here for the Midwest. Remember, I'm the New England guy.
How could
So,
you just step in there and judge? No, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, no, like it has been a bit of a down period. I feel like their biggest things are mesoscale convective systems, MCS, especially in and around like the transition seasons. Um,
okay, before you go any further, you're going to have to explain that a little bit more.
So it's like it's a little complex of thunderstorms, or little or big or whatever you want to call it. But usually they happen. They happen to form the transition times of season, and they could happen during the summer. But usually it's just like an April or May type of thing. And what happens is they just form into these big clusters of storms. They like to form at night. Um, uh, just I try to think of the reasons as to why they like to form at night. Um, but they do like to form at night, and eventually, once they form, they turn into these lines of thunderstorms that can be pretty strong. Usually, the biggest impacts from them are wind, severe wind, and maybe sometimes tornadoes.
Yeah, I think a lot of times out there they develop into derechos. Not not a lot of times, I should say. That's a more rare occurrence, but that's when you have one of these complexes that really gets a big cold pool of air behind the leading line of thunderstorms, and it just sustains itself all the way through the Midwest, and it happens more often than not. I would say out in the Midwest rather than something in the Northeast. We rarely get derechos occurring, but out in the Midwest, it's a bit flatter. Once they get going, they just kind of keep trucking on through all the way through the Mid Atlantic.
Roll on through, yeah, and go right to the East Coast.
Yeah, the biggest problem we have is we have the mountains, right? So, like, out here we deal with that. But yeah, out in the Midwest and anywhere where there's plains, it's fair game. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that happen out here too, is hail. We can just get larger hailstones from supercells. in some of these parts. And I want to say tornado, but we've had some, and a number of them out in the East Coast.
Well, I think what I was getting at with my severe weather is typically when you have supercells developing out there, out in the Midwest, they're a bit larger, a bit more textbook. Um,
Well, storms themselves seem to get taller out there anyway.
Whereas on the East Coast, when you get supercells developing, they are the tiniest little spin up, and pixels on a radar screen that we're just barely looking at. It's hard to pick out those little hook echoes where in the Midwest you have a much larger and defined hook echo on radar, which is basically like it's described. It looks like a hook signature in the thunderstorm, and that's indicating that you have rotation. So
I mean, and you are 100% right, Mike. And as I point out with the whole thing where they have hasn't been as busy, I think, over the last like couple of years, which is kind of true. I think they've had somewhat of a down period in the last couple of seasons. I don't recall a lot of things happening. We did have a derecho a few years ago when I was here, and it was pretty significant. It was that one that flattened all the corn in Iowa, I think, at one point, and all the cornfields. But I'm trying to think of the year. I'm bad at seeing. I'm bad at trying to remember when these things happened.
right. I mean, unless we're talking about a blockbuster blizzard or something like that, it's hard for me to remember those two. But I do remember at one point I was forecasting in the Midwest. So this might have been before your time, Chris, here at WeatherWorks. I remember a derecho happening, and it was very obvious. It was developing out in Iowa. You can see it. You can see the wind reports coming out. It was probably, although it was very destructive through northern Illinois, um, it was probably one of the more easier, I should say, things to forecast because you saw it coming. It's
It's
just a
there.
matter of
Time it.
timing out how fast it's moving and when it's going to arrive. I mean, it was basically shoe in as you get for the forecast. Um, but unfortunately, lots of destruction.
I will say, and you bring that up, but there is some credence to that, where it's like when it is a nice organized area of thunderstorms, you know what? That's like the best thing in a way. That and not to say, and obviously from an impact standpoint, it's not great, but for someone trying to track it, it has a lot more, and not only has a lot more eyes on it, it's just more obvious, right? It's not something that just forms and you didn't realize, in 2 seconds a tornado formed out of this thing. This is something that's long track that is covering, hundreds of miles, that, you know, you could see coming.
Right. And I'm sure both of you will agree. Anytime you have a situation as a forecaster that something is developing overhead,
Yes.
um,
That's
that
right.
is worst case scenario of because when you have thunderstorm initiation, yeah, you're looking for a front um, or something like that to trigger it, and where that exactly happens is the hardest thing to figure out. You're looking for some sort of source, the front, some elevations, some differential heating, some sea breezes, lake breezes, whatever it is, to try to find where that ignition source is going to be. So when it's developing overhead, it's more difficult because you have to try to find those little boundaries and those little areas that are going to trigger it. Um,
Micrometeorology.
right. Whereas if you have the big system like we're talking about, rolling through, it's easy to time out, and that's why
Mesoscale
I,
meteorology, yeah.
I almost of late a lot of December featured. As far as winter is concerned, a lot of little tiny events that were kind of, you know, disorganized and maybe not as large scale of winter storm like you like to see. And it's a lot of times I look at them and I go, why couldn't you just be a regular storm. Like, why, why do you have to be this disorganized piece of trash? Come, come. Sorry to be so blunt, but I mean that's what you see a lot of, and when it's disorganized and it's limited moisture, that's when it's difficult to forecast the impacts.
Mike, are you saying you don't like March snowstorms?
I did not say that. One of my favorite March snowstorms is a March snowstorm. Yeah, I mean Superstorm 93. Come on,
Oh yeah.
one of my favorite storms of all time.
Now, Mike's still jaded by the 4 nor'easters that impacted New England back in 2000, was it 18?
Oh,
March
boy.
of 2018.
Well, 13, 14, you can rack them up there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Where every other storm was 6 to 12 inch plus starting point, and then we just go up from there.
Yeah, didn't you tell me once one of the clients like, oh, only 6 inches out of this one? Okay.
Yeah, they didn't even. Oh, it's under a foot. Oh, no big deal. They already had the snow up to like their truck
Yeah, what's another?
roofs on the side of the road, so they were just like, okay, and that's okay. I can deal with 6 inches. Because it seemed like every storm that was forecast, started at 12 plus. And then you get 20 or 24 in some certain spots with the banding set up. So yeah, they had like 120 inches or something like that over that year.
Oh, they were trying to find places to put the snow, and they couldn't. They had to jump in the
Right.
ocean. Didn't
Yeah, there was a giant pile of
That was the trash snow pile. Yeah.
yeah in some parking lot or something or field that was I forget how long it actually lasted, but it seemed like it didn't melt for I don't even know how long.
June or something.
Yeah, it took a very long time. But Chris, is there any other memorable storms that you could think of that you really would like to talk about? I mean, we talked a little bit about the Groundhog Day storm, which was so unique in its intensity for areas in the Midwest. But is there any other storms that's really memorable for you?
I have one that's in my head. I need to. I
We need to beat it out of you or something?
need to think the date of when it happened, but there was a storm in Chicago. Of course, why not? It's Chicago. Um, and it had everything. So in terms of the setup and everything like that for a big snowfall in one localized area. It was it was a decently sized synoptic storm. It probably was roughly about 2 to 4, 3 to 6 inches for most areas. But then there was an area, a little corridor off of the lake, and through Cook County, um, that was a lake effect band that just snowed endlessly, and this was coming off of an extremely cold stretch. And there were, I think, the temperatures aloft were like -20, or something like that. It was really super cold, stupid cold, yeah, aloft while this storm was happening. So you had all the ingredients there. As long as you had lots of moisture and a strong system, that it was able to put out these big flakes. And I remember this one band just sitting over the metro, and this is the one time I can remember the metro outperforming everybody. They had about 15 or so inches of snow out of this thing, and it snowed endlessly under this one little lake effect band that just kept sitting there. And it was off. It was a lake effect band as a result of a synoptic system, that just kept sitting, for a while until it eventually uh, left. But I remember trying to forecast the end of that, and it was almost impossible. Until
Localized
eventually, so
Midwesting, I guess.
no, this is not Midwesting. This is definitely not
I know.
Midwesting. This is a different definition. And a lot of people try to steal our term Midwesting. This is Midwesting has a very special meaning, uh, but in terms of like the lake effects and the way it was sustained, I don't remember anything stranger or more difficult to try to pinpoint in my time here. That was a truly memorable event. I would have to probably get the exact date for you, but yeah, it was something else. It was like 2020 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. For some reason, I want to say I remember that system. I know I wasn't forecasting it, but I remember just, I suppose, appreciating how rare of occurrence that was. And not to bring it back to the Northeast again, but I remember having a similar setup in New England a few times with ocean effect and ocean enhancement. Whereas, oh man, I remember the one time there was a big oceanic storm, and it was trucking in moisture to Massachusetts, and there in Essex County, which is northeast Massachusetts, they had a, like you were saying, almost like a stationary band that was coming off the ocean and just sitting over Essex County. Now, everybody else, like you said, Chris, 2 to 4, 3 to 6, 4 to 8 inches, maybe. But in that one county, 15, 20, just there, and nowhere else. So, and clients are calling in and going like, "What is going on?" And me as the forecaster, I was just like you, trying to figure out, when's this thing going to end. And it was one of those rare occurrences where it was just kind of baffling on why it kept staying there and not moving, and while everybody else was kind of diminishing down. So I truly feel that, that pain of the rare storm, on your end there.
Yeah, it was a memorable one. I don't remember, like I said, and we talked about lake effect and how difficult it was to achieve, or how difficult it is to achieve that kind of lake effect. I think that's one of the things where that's one of the ways you can sustain that kind of lake effect is if you have a big synoptic system and super duper cold air. I think that was one of the things that was the biggest trigger for that particular event because you know it it was like almost like record book cold. And as long as you have that, again, you have the low DGZ, you have these big, dendrites that are falling, like it was able to sit there, for forever. And I think I have found it, Mike. I was been looking and researching since I have, we've been even speaking here. I believe this storm was February 14th to 16th of 2021.
Hmm.
Valentine's Day.
Yep,
Somewhere around there then. Hmm.
yep. And parts of the metro were about 15 to 18 inches. Anywhere outside of like the tollways, which are only a few miles inland of the lakeshore, were pretty much in like the 3 to 6, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 inch range. And then all of a sudden it just jumps into the mid and upper teens in terms of snowfall totals. So the one time that I think I can remember, because it's very rare that the metro areas outperform the inland spots.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that is certainly a memorable and rare storm. Well, Chris, I don't know unless you have something else to, little nuggets to drop on us here with the
Ah,
with the forecasting,
yeah, all right, all right.
aspect of the Midwest. If you have anything else, say your piece right now. But otherwise, I think it's about time to wrap up.
I'd say we've got and everyone else has gotten away with some very quiet times of late. We'll see if things get a little better in January. I'm a snow guy, my s- I think my passions definitely are for winter forecasting. But it's starting to get, we're starting to get there. Let's get some snow in here. That's what I would say. That's my
All
piece.
right. There you go. There's the last. So, Chris, thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable and lots of information.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me, and I know you guys hear me a lot here on this podcast, just introducing it, but it's good to be on it for the first time. So I appreciate you guys.
All right, Chris. Well, we'll have to have you on again soon. I'm sure there's plenty other topics that we can talk about.
For sure.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of our Weather Lounge podcast. So remember, we'll have a new episode every 2 weeks. So be sure to visit us once again. And also find WeatherWorks at weatherworksinc.com. Find out all we do there with the weather industry and the snow and ice industry. Visit WeatherWorks on social media. You can find us on pretty much every platform there is out there. We'll see you next time, or we'll talk to you next time here on the Weather Lounge.